Good morning. I'm Chaplain John Rollison with the Homestead Air Reserve Base Chapel. Thank you so much for joining us for our study of the book of Daniel. We have this study in person at the Homestead Air Reserve Base Chapel every Wednesday at 11:30 if you'd like to join us. However, we know many are not able to get away from work at that time, so we want to give you a virtual option as well. Today, we're going to summarize the first three chapters of the book of Daniel, which starts with Daniel and his friends chosen to be court officials in Babylon. In 605 BC, the Babylonians marched against Judah and they besieged Jerusalem. They took some temple articles to Babylon as well as some of Judah's finest young men. Nebuchadnezzar ordered his chief court official to choose the very best of these men and train them for service to the king. Among this group were Daniel and three of his friends. They were given Babylonian names and they were trained in Babylonian language and literature and placed on a special diet. However, Daniel regarded the food offered by the Babylonians to be defiling. The Mosaic law forbade God's people to eat unclean animals or flesh that had not been drained of blood. And portions of the wine and meat presented to these Jewish men may have been offered to idols as well, which was another problem for the practitioners of Judaism. Daniel convinced the Babylonians to allow him and his three friends to follow a different diet consisting only of vegetables and water. And after a 10-day trial period, they looked even healthier than those who were following the diet prescribed by the king, and consequently, they were not forced to eat the king's food or to drink his wine. And this showed Daniel and his friends great obedience to their God as opposed to what the world wanted them to do. In response to Daniel and his friends' faithfulness, the Lord gave them superior intellect and gave Daniel the ability to interpret dreams and visions. And when the king interviewed the trainees, he found Daniel and his friends to be the best and appointed them to his service. And their abilities far surpassed those of the king's wise men and magicians. Now, that was a summary of chapter 1. And chapter 2 is all about Daniel being able to interpret a dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had. Now, he had a dream that troubled him very greatly. And so King Nebuchadnezzar summoned the wise men and diviners, and perhaps to ensure credibility, commanded them not to just interpret the dream's contents, but to reveal what his dream was. If they failed, they would be executed. I like to say that this is an unreasonable request. How could they know what he dreamed? However, if they were able to figure it out and then interpret it, they would be rewarded. The diviners, understandably shaken, objected to the king's request that it was without precedent and that no one could know what another person dreamed. And in anger, the king decreed that all the royal diviners be put to death. Now, Daniel was not at this first meeting, but he found out about it later. And when he heard what happened, he and his friends prayed to the Lord for wisdom to know and interpret the dream so that their lives might be spared. And when the Lord revealed the dream to Daniel in a vision, he praised God as the sovereign ruler of the universe, who alone is the source of all wisdom. When Daniel went before King Nebuchadnezzar, he was careful to give God the credit. He let the king know he wasn't able to figure it out on his own, but God helped him and revealed the contents and the interpretation of the dream to him. He then told the king that the Lord revealed the contents and the interpretation of the dream to him. And in his dream, Nebuchadnezzar had seen a large statue. Its head was made of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, and its legs of iron. However, its feet were made of iron and clay. A large rock then came in and smashed the feet of the statue, causing it to fall down and to shatter. The rock then grew into a large mountain. And Daniel explained to Nebuchadnezzar that the dream pertained to world history. The statue represented successive world kingdoms, which would ultimately be displaced by God's kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian Empire was the golden head. The silver chest and arms represented a kingdom that would follow. And just as silver is inferior to gold, so the glory of this kingdom did not match that of Babylon. The bronze portions of the statue symbolized the third world kingdom, while the iron legs represented a fourth empire, which, like iron, would be especially powerful. Now, the mixture of clay and iron indicated that this empire would eventually divide and become vulnerable to attack. And God's kingdom, represented by the rock that smashed the statue and then grew into the mountain, would conquer this empire, bringing human rule to a violent end. And like a mountain, his kingdom would be incapable of destruction and would exist forever. Now, biblical scholars differ of the identification of the final three kingdoms represented in the vision. Some see the silver portions of the statue as the combined Medo-Persian Empire, the bronze parts as Alexander's Greek Empire, and the iron legs as Rome. Others see successive kingdoms as Media, Persia, and Greece. When Daniel finished, Nebuchadnezzar praised the Lord as the sovereign God who alone can reveal wisdom. And he rewarded Daniel, and he elevated Daniel and his three friends to prominent positions in the government's empire. So that's a summary of chapter 2, all about God using Daniel. Excuse me, I said David. I do that a lot. Using Daniel to interpret the vision, because God gave him the wisdom and the ability to do that. Now in Daniel chapter 3, we see where his three friends face death. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, apparently forgetting that he had just said that God was sovereign and the ruler of everything, he made a huge gold image. The image may have represented his authority or one of his gods. The king ordered all of his subjects to attend a dedication ceremony for the image, and at a designated time they were to bow to the image. All who refused to worship the image will be thrown into a fiery furnace. When David's friends refused to bow down to the image, the king became very angry, and he gave them an ultimatum and warned them of the consequences of disobedience. And they explained that their loyalty was to God, and it prevented them from worshiping images. They also told the king that the Lord was able to deliver them from the furnace if he wanted to. Now, after ordering the furnace to be heated to its maximum temperature, Nebuchadnezzar had Daniel's friends tied up and thrown in. And the fire was so hot that the flames killed the soldiers who threw them in. However, when Nebuchadnezzar looked into the furnace, he saw the three men walking around unbound, accompanied by an angelic being. And when the king ordered them out of the furnace, they were completely unharmed. And Nebuchadnezzar praised the Lord for delivering his faithful servants and decreed that anyone who slandered the Lord be executed, and he promoted the three men. So this is a summary of the first three chapters of the book of Daniel. If you have a Bible, I would encourage you to read it on your own. I promise it'll be an encouragement and a blessing to you. And if you're able to attend, we have our study of the book of Daniel. We go into much more depth than the summary I just gave you for the first three chapters. When we meet here at the chapel on Wednesdays at 11:30, we would certainly love to have you in attendance. Hope to see you there. And this is Chaplain John Rawlison with the Homestead Air Reserve Base Chapel.